Trevor Lawrence tests positive for COVID-19. Which undefeated team outside the top four has the best chance at making the college football playoff? And I preview each of the Week 6 matchups for the college pick'em season. I'm Jay Smith, and this is After Further Review.
And now, after further review, a Clemson student's perspective on sports.
And a personal foul on number 99 of the defense after he tackled the quarterback. He's giving them business down there. That's a 15-yard penalty.
Welcome in, everyone. I'm Jay Smith, and this is After Further Review. Thanks so much for tuning in to this week's Friday show. So much to talk about. My goodness. One of the biggest storylines to come out of college football this season just broke last night, and of course that is Trevor Lawrence testing positive for COVID-19. Clemson announced this late last night. Wasn't too late in the evening, but obviously it had college football Twitter in a frenzy. And after this announcement, obviously, everybody's thinking, okay, well, what's the status of him going forward, and how is that going to affect the rest of the season? We do know for certain that he's obviously going to miss Saturday's game against Boston College. The big question right now is, will Clemson be able to clear Lawrence before Notre Dame? Now, one of the most reliable sources when it comes to Clemson beat writers is David Hood over at TigerNet. And last I had saw from David Hood, he reported that Trevor Lawrence could technically be cleared to play the day of the Notre Dame game. The issue right now is he would not be able to travel with the team the day prior on Friday to South Bend, Indiana. And so either Trevor flies up to Notre Dame the day of the game, or some other scenario plays out. Either way, David Hood reported that at this point it seems unlikely that Trevor Lawrence is going to be able to play against Notre Dame. So, several points this season. We've had discussions on the show. Clemson has been the dominant team in college football. They've been the team to beat. They've looked head and shoulders really above everybody else. We've kind of talked a little bit about some of the weaknesses of the other teams that are sitting near the top right now. I mean, there's not a lot of body, there's not a huge body of work for Ohio State. Having only played one game, I don't personally have Ohio State in my top four. I don't know why you would have Ohio State in the top four when, almost every other team in the top 10, except for Wisconsin, has at least 3 or 4 games played. Now, Florida's kind of that weird 2-1, but everybody else is either 4-0, 5-0. Clemson's at 6-0. And then you have Georgia and A&M in there with a single loss. So odd for Ohio State to be at third, in my honest opinion. But regardless, we have spent some time talking about how the rest of these teams have looked beatable at times. Alabama has looked beatable. Notre Dame has looked beatable. Oklahoma State has been shaky. Cincinnati's been fairly strong, although Cincinnati's level of competition in the American is certainly not what you would find in a typical Power 5 conference. So either way, the unbeatable looking team, right, the invincible looking team, the team that looked like they were going to cruise to another college football playoff appearance, another national championship appearance. Well, we may have to recalibrate our thinking, because Clemson obviously is well equipped to handle Boston College. I don't think that they're going to have any trouble taking care of business there. I mean, certainly there could be some jitters, starting off. I would expect maybe a drive or two in the first half to look a little sloppy. But I really think that the DJ is going to settle in and I think he's going to perform well. And listen, Clemson obviously has this luxury where they're able to get snaps for their backup guys, right? So, a lot of schools, second and third string quarterbacks aren't seeing a lot of snaps unless you're in a tune-up non-conference game. Well, Clemson has been able to get their backup snaps in, if not every game this season, almost every game this season. So obviously they have that going for them. But looking ahead, right, to Clemson's schedule, because there's a lot of people out there, and I even saw this today with Paul Feinbaum talking about, what would the committee, how would the committee consider a Clemson loss at Notre Dame without a Trevor Lawrence? And I'm like, that seems a little premature to just go ahead and write in an L in that slot for Clemson against Notre Dame on November 7th. But, setting that aside, Florida State, Pitt, and Virginia Tech are the three games left this year right now that are going to be that are scheduled to be played for Clemson. And assuming that they get through Boston College, and then they clean the rest of their schedule, Florida State, Pitt, Virginia Tech, even if that Notre Dame game ends up being a loss, right? Even if they do lose to Notre Dame, what you're going to see is a rematch, right, of Clemson and Notre Dame in the ACC championship game. Because we don't have divisions in the ACC this year, we're taking the top two teams, and if Clemson's only loss in conference play is to Notre Dame, then, right now you have Miami and North Carolina as the only two teams in the ACC with one loss in conference play, right? So we're just sticking in the conference part of this equation. Now, Clemson has already played Miami this year, beat them soundly. So they hold the tiebreaker over Miami. So they don't really need to worry about that. For North Carolina, things, do get a little bit more interesting because these two teams obviously don't play each other, right? Clemson and North Carolina don't play each other this season. Now, Clemson plays in Miami and Notre Dame. North Carolina plays Miami and Notre Dame. North Carolina hasn't played either schools yet, though they're scheduled to play them Notre Dame on November 27th and then Miami on the road December 5th. I believe the tiebreaker in this scenario, if both of these, if North Carolina finishes the season with one loss in conference, which that's assuming they beat Notre Dame and Miami, which then again opens a whole nother Pandora's box of, okay, well now Notre Dame has one loss. So then you have three one-loss teams. Miami gets removed from the equation because we're assuming they lose to North Carolina. So you would have a one-loss Clemson. You'd have a Clemson team that lost to Notre Dame. You'd have a North Carolina team that lost to Florida State. And you would have a Notre Dame team that lost to North Carolina. Of those three, obviously I think you could make the case that Clemson's loss looks the best because we are assuming they'd be without their star quarterback, and it would be the number 4 team on the road. North Carolina's loss looks the worst, right? Losing on the road by 3 to Florida State, a team that's right now at the bottom of the ACC. And then Notre Dame, their loss to North Carolina on the road is somewhere in the middle. Again, we're assuming a lot. This is all speculative, but that would really create a really chaotic scenario going into the ACC championship game. And unless I'm missing something here, because there's a lot to keep track of, unless I'm missing something here, I think in that situation, the next tiebreaker would go to like all common opponents that season. I'm not sure if that's been changed this year. I'd have to refresh what the ACC does in events of ties. And obviously it's different when you're playing divisions versus just all one big lump conference. So that's a bit of a far-fetched scenario. I don't think that's likely to happen. I don't see North Carolina beating Notre Dame. And I still am not sold on Clemson losing to Notre Dame just because they don't have Trevor Lawrence. Because again, Notre Dame this year, right? They're 5-0, obviously. They've looked really hot at times. Played really well against Pitt last week. Did not play well against Louisville the week prior. The season opener against Duke, they looked a little slow. But then South Florida, they destroyed them 52-0. So I'm not sure that you can just go ahead and say, yep, without Trevor Lawrence, Clemson is not going to stand a chance against Notre Dame. Because, again, we just – and this is – when we look at the inconsistencies of Notre Dame, what's really interesting is that they tend to have tighter games at home. And they've only played one true road game this year. And they've only played one road game this year at Pitt because the Wake Forest game was postponed. So they have Georgia Tech this weekend, and that game is going to be on the road. So we'll be able to see a little bit more, I think, out of Notre Dame. Now, again, I'm not expecting Georgia Tech to compete with Notre Dame, but I think we need to see another game out of the Fighting Irish before we can really pass judgment on what that matchup with Clemson is going to look like. And on the flip side, I think we need to see a Clemson team without their star quarterback, without the best football player in America, in Trevor Lawrence. What is that Clemson team going to look like? Because, again, not only does Trevor have COVID, he's also in isolation. So, he's not going to be able to attend team meetings unless it's virtually somehow. He's not going to be able to practice. And the other thing you have to remember is even if Trevor Lawrence is somehow cleared for that Notre Dame game, he's not going to have taken reps in 10, 11 days? He won't have actually practiced all the week leading up to the game. So you would imagine he's going to be rusty, and in that kind of environment, that kind of big game atmosphere, would you want a guy that's going out there that hasn't really thrown a ball to his receivers in a week, almost a week and a half? Now, obviously, again, want to wish Trevor Lawrence a speedy recovery. He so far it seems is experiencing mild symptoms, mild in quotes, and mild can mean a lot of different things. I know that when President Trump had COVID, they described his symptoms as mild. But then there were also reports that he was in more serious condition. Again, mild is I think it's an intentionally vague term that encompasses a pretty wide spectrum of how it's actually affecting you. So obviously we hope, that he recovers quickly and that there's no long-lasting ramifications for having COVID. But you really got to feel for him because this is a guy that hasn't missed a game in his 3 seasons at Clemson. He's the front runner right now for the Heisman. I think he's the runaway front runner for the Heisman. And, this Clemson was listed as a 29.5 point favorite over Boston College. And then after this announcement, Clemson's now a 24 point favorite. So a little bit of a knock, right? You have to take that into consideration. But I still think Clemson handles Boston College. I think they get it, and I think they're going to win it for Trevor, right? I think that could become their mentality, and I'm sure it's already being, discussed, not just in team meetings, but in the locker room. Those guys want to go out there and they want to win it for Trevor Lawrence. So going on to the the ACC, the protocol, the quarantine side of all this discussion. Under the rules established by the ACC's medical advisory group, any player who tests positive for COVID-19 must isolate for at least 10 days after the test before returning to practice, assuming the player is no longer showing symptoms. So, again, I think the likelihood of Clemson having Trevor Lawrence for Notre Dame, and this is reinforced by Clemson beat reporters like David Hood at TigerNet, it's unlikely. It's probably not going to happen. Now, Lawrence has missed some playing time in the past. Obviously, everybody remembers that game in 2018 when he went down with the injury in the first half against Syracuse. And then Chase Bryce came in, had to really lead not just a relief effort, but also had to win the game. I mean, we were not playing well. Syracuse had us on the ropes at home, and Chase Bryce had to come in and save the day, save the season in a lot of ways for Clemson, because that preserved Clemson's perfect record, and Clemson obviously went on to win a national championship that year and become the first 15-0 college football team in the modern era. So Clemson has dealt with losing Trevor in the past, and they've handled it well. Now, is DJ, the same guy as Chase Bryce? No, they're completely different. But that doesn't mean that DJ can't get it done. That doesn't mean that DJ can't save the day and maybe save the season for Clemson. And again, this is a story that I expect will probably evolve a good deal over the weekend. I would imagine they're going to spend at least a segment or two on College Game Day discussing this. The other big story that's COVID related from this week is obviously Wisconsin and the Wisconsin-Nebraska game that was canceled. I think Wisconsin had, this is off the top of my head, I believe they had 16 positive tests. I know their head coach tested positive. And, again, with COVID and with the protocols and the quarantines set in place, it's challenging. It's challenging to, get the guys quarantined, make sure that they're treated, and if they recover, able to return to the playing field. And so, I'm not sure what next week will bring in terms of Trevor Lawrence news, but I imagine that we will have some updates. We probably will have some updates by the end of this weekend. I still think, and just to wrap up this discussion briefly, touching on the football schedule and all that, I still think Clemson handles Boston College. I still think that we can't write off Clemson against Notre Dame yet, and even if they were to lose that game, if they clean the rest of their schedule, they're in a good position to face off against Notre Dame in the ACC Championship, which gives Trevor Lawrence an opportunity at, redemption, right? Since he wasn't able to play Notre Dame earlier that season, we're assuming. And I think in that game, you talk about motivated, Clemson will be Notre Dame will be quaking in their boots to go up against Clemson and Trevor Lawrence. So we will see. But again, I would say one of the biggest stories out of college football this season, and certainly the first time we're going to get a look at Clemson without the best player in the country, in Trevor Lawrence. So I don't know. We will see how that all unfolds. All right, let's take a break, and when we come back, we're going to be talking about which undefeated team outside the top four has the best chance at making the college football playoff. It's going to be an interesting discussion. You don't want to miss it. That's next. Welcome back to the show. Thanks so much for tuning in. I'm Jay Smith, and this is After Further Review. Appreciate you listening, whether it's through the podcast or if you're watching on Facebook. And let's talk a little bit now about some under-the-radar teams, some teams that aren't getting the love and the attention that Clemson or Alabama or Ohio State, unwarranted as it may be, are getting. Now, look, do I think that Ohio State has a chance to make the college football playoff? Sure, absolutely. I think, until proven otherwise, I think that they certainly belong in the discussion of, one of the more complete teams in the country. Now, does that mean that they should be ranked third right now? No, because, they haven't displayed the same consistency as some other teams that are ranked right now below them. However, deviating from that a little bit, I want to talk about some teams that are not in the top 4 right now. Specifically, Oklahoma State, who's sitting at 6, Cincinnati, who's sitting at 7, or skip over Wisconsin, because again, 1-0, so we're going to skip over Wisconsin. BYU, who's 6-0 at 11. And that's really, some people would say, well, wait a minute, what about Marshall? What about Coastal Carolina? They're both 5-0 at 19 and 20. I'm not going to ignore them, but we're talking about teams that have a chance to make the college football playoff. And I'm sorry, but Marshall and Coastal Carolina they're not going to make the college football playoff. They're not going to make the college football playoff. Even if they were to go undefeated, they're not making it in the top 4. It's just not going to happen. And we've talked about this extensively. I think this year there's room for one group of 5 team or an independent. Now remember, if this was any other year, Notre Dame's an independent. Okay, so Notre Dame's going to fill that spot, and everybody else, the Cincinnatis, the BYU's, the Marshalls and the Coastal Carolinas, and until last week SMU, they're kind of sitting on the outside looking in. Now they still are to a certain degree, but because Notre Dame is in the ACC, I feel there's an opportunity for Clemson or for Notre Dame to cancel the other one out, right, and eliminate them from still making the playoff. I don't see 2 ACC teams making the playoff. Because at this point, we have to assume that Clemson and Notre Dame, unless something crazy happens, they're going to play each other twice. They're going to play each other in a week, and then they're going to play each other in the ACC championship. So, let's start off with Oklahoma State, right? They're 4-0, currently at 6th, the last undefeated team in the Big 12. And listen, the Cowboys, as much as they've been ragged this year, they are still in a fairly good spot. They're taking care of business. They're winning games, close games, like the game against Iowa State. They won that one 24-21. Iowa State's a good football team. The Tulsa and West Virginia games were a little sloppy, a little slow. They had a postponed game against Baylor. Kansas, they throttled them, but that's Kansas. So far, Oklahoma State hasn't looked great at times, but they still don't have a loss, right? They're still 4-0. And when you compare it to the rest of the Big 12, right, they look like they have their stuff together, because the rest of the Big 12 doesn't have their stuff together. Now, Oklahoma State has Texas, Kansas State, and Oklahoma the next 3 weeks. And Kansas State and Oklahoma are on the road. So it's a rather tough stretch, honestly. Kansas State on the road and Oklahoma on the road, that still pose challenges, even to good football teams. And so we're really going to be able to figure out, I think, in the next 2 to 3 weeks, who is Oklahoma State? Who are they really? We've seen them play good teams close in Iowa State. We've seen them destroy bad teams in Kansas, and we've seen them play sloppy in games like Tulsa. But I think if the Cowboys can get through the next 3 weeks, if they can get to the end of November 21st and have wins against Texas, Kansas State, and Oklahoma, 2 of those being on the road, they will certainly be in the college football playoff discussion. Certainly. And that leaves Texas Tech, TCU, and Baylor left for the Cowboys. So, I don't think it's the easiest path, and I don't think, they're going to blow out everybody they play the rest of the year. But there's certainly an opportunity. Because again, look, Oklahoma and Texas have struggled this season. That's an understatement, right? They have not looked good at all. The Cowboys, I wouldn't say they've surged, but they have certainly so far taken advantage of the opportunity that's been given to them, right? They didn't lose to Iowa State. They won that game. They found a way to take care of business against Tulsa. They didn't lose that game. Their defenses look stronger than typical Big 12 defenses. I mean, again, not a championship caliber defense by any stretch of the imagination, but they've still performed, well. And they're going to need to if they want to shut down a guy like Sam Ehlinger. Right now Oklahoma State's, they're allowing about 12 points a game, which in the Big 12 is pretty good. And you look at Texas, right? Texas is allowing 32 points a game. Now, Oklahoma State's only scoring 28 on average. Texas is scoring 45. So, Oklahoma State's offense is certainly not as prolific as the higher caliber offenses in the Big 12. So the question really is, can Oklahoma State find a way to beat Texas, Kansas State, and Oklahoma with a good defense and an okay offense? That's really what the question is here. Because, again, Oklahoma State's quarterback, Shane Illingworth, hasn't been, really a big playmaker. I mean, the guy's only thrown for 483 yards on the season. He has 3 touchdowns and a pick. You go over to Sam Ehlinger for Texas, guy has almost 1,500 yards passing, 17 touchdowns, and 5 interceptions. So Oklahoma State has won games in the Big 12 in an unconventional way. And they're going to have to continue to do that the next 3 weeks. So it's going to be, I think it's going to be interesting to watch. Do I feel, again, I've said this before and I still feel this way. Do I think the Big 12 is getting a team in the college football playoff? No, I still don't. I still think the Big 12 is on the outside looking in. I just think that Texas and Oklahoma, for whatever reason, they get up. They get the benefit of the doubt as opposed to a team like Oklahoma. Like Oklahoma's going to get put in the playoff, right? They've been in the playoff 3 straight years, lost all 3 semifinals, but they've been in the playoff for 3 straight years. I don't know what they're doing in the playoff except losing games, but they are put in the playoff because they're the Big 12 champion and because they're Oklahoma. Now, is Oklahoma State going to get that nod? I don't know. And if they lose a game, let's say they lose to Kansas State. I think they can take care of Texas. I feel good about them beating Oklahoma. And the reason for that is Texas and Oklahoma rely solely on offense to win football games. Solely on offense. The defenses are trash. Trash defenses at Texas and Oklahoma. The kind of team that Oklahoma State doesn't necessarily match up as well with, right? The team that could give them a really good game like Iowa State did are the teams that have a little bit more of a defense, and that's Kansas State and that's Iowa State. And what do you see? You see closer games. So I think Oklahoma State matches up really well against Texas and Oklahoma. I think they win those games. I think Kansas State, rather, it could be more of a toss-up wild card, and it should be a great game. So that's a little bit about Oklahoma State sitting at 6. Let's talk about Cincinnati from the American, sitting at 4-0 in 7th place. Now, Cincinnati, I expected SMU to win. I expected the game to be close. And I really was surprised when Cincinnati came out and was more physical in all phases, really, offense, defense, and special teams. I was watching this game, and I was like, my goodness, SMU just didn't show up. It was like Auburn, Georgia, where Auburn was just, I don't know if they just thought they could go through the motions or if I just don't know what happened with Auburn, Georgia, but I don't know what happened with Cincinnati, SMU. Because on paper, these two teams should have been very competitive, and it wasn't. Cincinnati dismantled the Mustangs on the road. It was impressive. It was impressive. People are going to say, well, it's just SMU. It was impressive. It was an impressive win for a Bearcats team that is now sitting at 7th and has a really nice track to an undefeated season. Memphis, Houston, East Carolina, UCF, Temple, and Tulsa are the remaining games on the Cincinnati schedule. And if you're the Bearcats, you have to be feeling good about all 6 of those matchups, which would put you at 10-0 with a shot to win the American Conference. And I think right now the Bearcats have the best shot out of any Group of 5 independent team. I think the Bearcats are the team to pick and put them in the college football playoff. Now, college football is college football. Could Cincinnati somehow find a way to lose to UCF? I suppose they could. But if Cincinnati plays to their ability, right, they don't play down to their opponent. I've said this about teams in the past. Clemson, Ohio State, Alabama, whoever. Now, Clemson struggles with this, I think, more than most other blue bloods. But if you don't play down to your opponent, you play to your skill level, you execute, you don't turn the ball over, you don't make stupid mistakes, you're going to win these games. You're going to win these games. You're going to win them by a lot. And you're going to get to an American Conference championship, and I think you stand a pretty good chance. Now, right now in the American, Cincinnati, Houston, and Tulsa are 2-0 in conference play. And Cincinnati has to play both of those schools on their regular season schedule. They have Houston November 7th, and they have Tulsa on the road December 5th. So that's those are the 2 games. Of the games left on their schedule, the 6 games remaining, those 2 are the ones that they're going to circle because they have the biggest implication for positioning in the conference and then a shot at the American Conference Championship. If we go with this theory of Cincinnati just taking care of business, which I think they can do, based off of what we've seen so far, based off their performance against Army, their performance against UCF, their performance against SMU and Austin Peay, it's setting up really nice. Setting up really, really nice for the Bearcats. And I think right now, Cincinnati has a better shot at making the college football playoff than Oklahoma State. I do. I think Cincinnati is more on the inside and on the inside track to a shot. Now, is it a long shot? Yeah, it is, because it's a Group of 5 team, but I think they've got a pretty good chance because of the implosion of the Big 12 and because of the lesser reputation of Oklahoma State. I think that puts them at a disadvantage, in addition to the fact that their remaining schedule is tougher than Cincinnati's. Oklahoma State's remaining schedule is tougher than Cincinnati's. There's no disputing that. Now, if both teams finish the season undefeated, yeah, you're going to pick Oklahoma State, duh. But I don't see Oklahoma State getting through that slate of games. Again, I think they would lose to Kansas State. So right now I think Cincinnati has a better shot at making the playoff, which leads us to the final team of this discussion. And it's a really interesting team. It's a team that I don't think a lot of people were paying attention to at the beginning of the year, and you know who I'm talking about. It's BYU, okay? The Cougars came out and shocked everybody, and I think it was one of the first games of the season against Navy, and won that one 55-3. That was back on, goodness, when was that game? That was September 7th. The game was at Navy, and BYU came out, destroyed them 55-3. They dismantled Troy a couple weeks later, took care of Louisiana Tech, beat UT San Antonio. They took care of Houston. They whooped up on Texas State. There's really been no threat. They've only had one possession game this season. That was against UT San Antonio. They won that 27-17. to 20. Now, could BYU, could they make it to the college football playoff as an independent? Only team to do it is Notre Dame. And Notre Dame is more of a blue blood than BYU, at least in the last few decades. Because BYU has no conference championship, because they're the independent, and because Cincinnati is above them and also undefeated, I think that puts them at a significant disadvantage. It's a benefit that Notre Dame is in the ACC, right? That eliminates, because if you're BYU, you're always looking up to Notre Dame in brand recognition, almost anything else. Usually, in terms of independence, the structure has always been Notre Dame's at the top, and then everybody else is kind of there. And this year, BYU has really come on, and they've played really, really well, and they're 6-0, and they have 4 games left. 1 game right now is against a ranked team. That's at number 25 Boise State on November 6th. But, these guys have been playing, I think, hotter than anybody in the country. I think this is the hottest team in the country right now, BYU. Just the dominance that they have shown. And again, that's not to take anything away from some stuff we've seen from Clemson. It's just to say that everybody really expected that, right? Like we're not surprised that Clemson's beating ACC teams by like 70 points. Like that's kind of like we saw that coming. BYU has been more of a surprise, and so I think again, while they certainly should be in the discussion if they're 10-0 at the end of the year, I don't think they're going to get the nod because they're still outside the top 10 right now, and we're almost. I think we're almost 2/3 of the way through the season at this point. Got to be about 2/3 of the way through the season at this point. We're pretty close. I think because Oklahoma State right now is still undefeated, that kind of gives the Big 12 some last glimmer of hope. That could disappear in a couple of weeks, and then the last hurdle could be Cincinnati. If Oklahoma State loses to Kansas State, and Cincinnati loses to like a UCF or some other team, or loses in their American Conference Championship, the door has been flung wide open for BYU. And I think there's going to be a lot of people asking lots of good questions about why can't BYU have a shot. Now, they're probably going to go up against Clemson. If Clemson hangs on to that number 1 spot, if they win, if they beat Notre Dame and they take care of the rest of their schedule and they're undefeated going into the playoff, Clemson's going to be number 1. So BYU would probably be going up against Clemson. And I think most people, myself included, would pick Clemson in that game. But, I think BYU deserves to be in that discussion. And I don't think if you replace BYU with any other team, if you replace them with Oklahoma State, if you replace them with Cincinnati, just as an example, I don't think any of those teams are going to be any more competitive against Clemson than BYU would be. And I think BYU would play Clemson more competitively than a lot of people would think. Okay, these guys, they believe. Oklahoma State, I don't think quite is there yet. Cincinnati may be getting there after their win against SMU, but the Cougars believe they belong. And when you believe you belong, you're going to play inspired, and you're going to play better than you should on paper, is my point. So I don't know about the Cougars right now. I don't know that they necessarily will be in the discussion for one of the best 4 teams, but certainly I think you're doing a disservice if you don't acknowledge what they've accomplished this season. Great football team. I'm excited that more independents are starting to become more consistent, and I think that's a good thing for college football. Okay, one last break, and we come back, we'll wrap up the show. Let's go Week 6 college pick'em. The league's getting exciting, man. It's been a lot of fun. We have some matchups we want to discuss. That is next. Welcome back to the show. Thanks so much for tuning in. This is After Further Review. I'm Jay Smith, and we got one last segment of this week's Friday show, and that is the Pick'em League. Week 6 for College Pick'em. Let's remind everybody our current standings right now. Top dog is Aaron Long. He's sitting in the top 0.7%. He's 99.3 percentile right now at 32 total points. I am sitting at 30 points. We got Razorback 11 at 29, Hannah Reagan at 28, and then Jackson Wright at 28 also. That rounds out our top 5. But everybody else is really close. 6th place is right there, 1 point below. It has been a hotly contested league this season, and I'm looking forward to seeing how it plays out the rest of the year. But now it's time for some picks. And first up on the slate, we got Kansas State and West Virginia. Now, West Virginia this year, they're sitting at 3-2, and they haven't looked great, but they also haven't looked horrible. It did take 2 overtimes to beat Baylor back on October 3rd. They did drop a game to Texas Tech last week on the road, 34-27. But they can still move the ball. Right? They're averaging 460 yards of total offense a game. Kansas State, as we talked about, right? As we talked about this in the previous segment, they're a team that matches up well with an Oklahoma State team, a team that has more of a defense in the Big 12. And so, I think that the Kansas State's defense will cause some problems for West Virginia, and again, their performance the last few weeks, I think has been pretty solid, and so I think the Wildcats win this game. Interestingly, though, it's right now according to ESPN, Kansas State is 52%. And West Virginia is 48%. So this is essentially a toss-up game. And I think that's doing a little bit of a disservice to Kansas State. I think they're a better team than people realize. I'm going with Kansas State. It could be a close one. I think it'll probably be a 1 or 2 possession game, but I think the Wildcats get it done. All right, next up on the slate, we got Memphis and Cincinnati. Memphis sitting at 3-1. Cincinnati 4-0. Again, we've already talked a lot about Cincinnati today. Key guys from Memphis, Brady White, their quarterback, he's played pretty well this year. He's got 1,400 yards passing, 17 touchdowns, and 4 picks. So he's played well. Memphis has ran the ball pretty well. They're averaging a little over 200 yards on the ground a game. But the biggest thing for Memphis has been their defense. A defense that is allowing 33 points a game and 567 yards. You're not going to win many football games when your defense allows more yards than your offense. Now, I know they're 3-1, and the only loss on their schedule is to a 3-point loss to SMU on the road, right? They've beaten Temple, they've beaten UCF, they've beaten Arkansas State. The UCF game was a 50-49 win. It was a 1-pointer. The Temple and Arkansas State games were 2-possession wins. But still, Memphis' defense has looked really, really bad. I expect Cincinnati to exploit that, and I think the Bearcats will win this one rather handily. All right, next up we got Coastal Carolina and Georgia State. Now, Coastal Carolina's 5-0. Didn't talk about them in the previous segment a whole lot. Mentioned them briefly. They are in the Sun Belt Conference and undefeated, like we said a minute ago. They played well this season, and they're riding pretty high. And I think actually turning on, I think it was ESPN2 a couple times this year, and getting a chance to watch them play has been really a lot of fun. One of the things that people don't know about Coastal, though, is they have a really good defense, and I think they're going to be able to get pressure on Georgia State's quarterback Cornelius Brown IV. What a name! That is a badass name, Cornelius Brown IV. for Georgia State, but he hasn't looked great. He hasn't looked sharp. He's 78 for 132, 900 yards passing, 9 TDs, but 4 picks. So I expect Coastal Carolina to force some turnovers. I think they win this game, going with the Chanticleers. All right, next matchup. We got UCF and Houston. The Golden Knights are 3-2, and the Cougars are 2-1. This is kind of a, again, an under-the-radar game, a game that not a lot of people are going to be tuning into. I think it's on ESPN Plus, I believe. Kickoff is at 2 p.m. Eastern, and it's at Houston. UCF's had a fantastic offense this year. They're averaging 650 yards of total offense, mostly through the air, about 435 yards passing. And Houston hasn't looked bad either, but with only 450 total yards of offense, you got to think that if this is a shootout, you're going to favor the Knights. And I think it will be a shootout because both defenses allow more than 30 points a game. Right? Both of these defenses are porous. They have lots of issues, and I think this is going to come down to who scores the most points. And in that matchup, the Knights are who you should favor, and I'm going to go with UCF. All right, next matchup, we're going to switch over to the Big Ten. We got Northwestern sitting at 1-0 and Iowa at 0-1. Again, not a whole lot of excitement surrounding this matchup. It does kick off at 3:30 on ESPN. But, based off what we've seen so far, Northwestern beating Maryland 43-3 last week, and then obviously Iowa losing at Purdue 24-20. I think, again, a little early to pass judgment on either of these teams. I think Iowa is certainly, they're going to bounce back, and I think they're going to play better as the season goes along. They had a lot of issues though on defense last week, and that's what allowed Purdue to stay in that game and eventually win. But if you're Northwestern, man, you'll be feeling really good about how they performed against Maryland. Is it a fluke? It's really hard to say. I think this is a toss-up game, and I feel like Iowa wins this one. I think you got to ignore the records, ignore last week, and I think the Hawkeyes win. But could be a really close game. Honestly, I'm expecting that to be a bit of a toss-up. Okay, moving over to the SEC now. We got 4 matchups left. We got LSU at Auburn. Man, this is the game for the SEC teams that thought they were going to be the best thing ever this year and ended up being average to below average. Right? LSU at 2-2, Auburn's at 3-2, and I was high on Auburn, man. I really thought this was the year for the Auburn Tigers. I almost said the Tigers and realized that both these guys are the Tigers. I really did. I thought Bo Nix was going to play well, and I thought based off his performance freshman year, I was just wrong. Just wrong about Auburn, and boy, was I really wrong about Auburn. That being said, LSU, they're just awful. I mean, they're 2-2, but they beat Vanderbilt and South Carolina. So I don't know how impressed you can really be with LSU. The losses to Mississippi State and Missouri are ugly. This is really the first middle of the pack SEC team that LSU has played this year. That's the crazy thing. Is LSU has played 4 of the worst teams in the SEC, and they're 2-2. I think Auburn wins this game. Ignoring the fact that they've had some serious offensive woes. I mean, again, you got an Auburn team right now that's averaging 24 points a game on offense, and they average on defense allowing 25 points a game. Auburn's had major issues on offense, but LSU I don't think has played anybody. And if Bo Nix is just 30% competent, Auburn wins this game. If he is competent, which again, has only happened a handful of times this year. I'm picking Auburn. This one's actually a really close one on the national average. I think right now Auburn's looks like 60-40. But God, don't watch this game. I feel bad because this is the 3:30 CBS game. Like, this is the best game they had, Auburn and LSU, and it should have been a big time matchup, right? And yikes. I don't know. This is probably the first weekend all season that I don't tune into CBS for their 3:30 game. Indiana and Rutgers. Surprisingly, both these teams are 1-0. We all remember Indiana's win against Penn State last week. Maybe you did. Maybe you didn't know that Rutgers also won. Yes, they are 1-0. Currently tied for first in the Big Ten East after their win at Michigan State 38-27 last weekend. With that being said, I think Indiana wins this one. I don't think I don't think this will be particularly close. I think Indiana's a far more talented team than Rutgers. It is hard to say. They had moments of greatness in the Penn State game, but then they also showed why they're Indiana football, right? They made a lot of mistakes, a lot of stupid decisions as that game was ending and taking away the heroics of Michael Penix, the quarterback there at the last second to get the 2-point conversion. There was just some weird, bad decisions by Indiana. So they may be their own worst enemy. We'll have to wait and see how this game goes. But I'm picking the Hoosiers in this matchup. Okay, 2 games left. Big 12 game right here. We got Texas and Oklahoma State. We talked about this a little bit earlier in the show. I think Oklahoma State wins this one. I think they match up well against a team like Texas that relies solely on their offense to win games. And I think the Cowboys will win this one. All right, last matchup. This is the marquee matchup, or it was going to be the marquee matchup of this weekend before Penn State lost to Indiana, and that is Ohio State traveling to Happy Valley, now Sad Valley, and taking on Penn State. If Penn State was 1-0, I'd still pick Ohio State. There was a lot of talk, and I talked about this on the show, did a whole segment on it last week, on the teams in the Big Ten that might challenge Ohio State, that could compete for a Big Ten championship. And Penn State was one of those teams, but they had to clear the Ohio State hurdle. And nothing I saw from last week makes me think they can. Now, Ohio State didn't look great in the first quarter. I'd say the first quarter and a half against Nebraska. They finally kind of pulled away midway through the second and won that one, I believe, 52-17. But I just what do you if you pick Penn State, what is the basis for that? Where? Show me, because I'd love to know. And I'm not picking Ohio State because I want to pick Ohio State. I don't want to pick Ohio State. But why would you pick Penn State? Where's the evidence? So I got to go Buckeyes, man. It kills me. I just threw up in my mouth a little bit, but I got to pick Ohio State because, Penn State lost, and it just doesn't look good at all. That being said, I think final score for this one, it'll probably be fairly close. I hope Penn State gives them a good game, but I think Ohio State will probably win this one, 38-31, somewhere in that ballpark. But that's the Week 6 matchups for College Pick'em League. Be sure to get your picks in. Again, the leaderboard is super tight. Congrats to Aaron Long for being the top dog right now, but we're coming for him, and so be sure to get your picks in and keep trying to climb your way up the leaderboard. Well, I think that's all the time we got for this edition of After Further Review. Again, we will definitely be doing a show early next week, and I'm sure we'll have a lot of Trevor Lawrence news. We'll see how that all plays out this weekend. It's college football, man. Anything can happen. We'll see you after the weekend. Enjoy your weekend. Enjoy college football. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Jay Smith. This has been After Further Review.